Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I'm Kirti Sophia Panachan, and in today's session we'll be continuing the chapter Toba Tek Singh by Saadat Hassan Manto, and this is the third part. We'll continue the chapter. In the European ward were two Anglo-Indians. When they heard that the English had given Hindustan freedom and then left, they were devastated. In the course of several secret meetings, they discussed the future of their status in the asylum. Would the European ward be retained? Would they continue to get breakfast? Would they be forced to eat the bloody Indian chapati instead of bread? A Sikh who had been in the asylum for 15 years used to mutter constantly to himself, Oper di gurgur di annexi di by Dania di moong di dal di of Laltain. He kept saying over and over again. He slept neither at night nor during the day. According to the guards, he had not slept at all in 15 years. He did not lie down either. Sometimes he leaned against a wall. His feet and ankles were swollen from standing too much, but in spite of the bodily discomfort he experienced, he refused to rest. With great seriousness he listened to all the talk about the matter, then assumed a solemn air and replied, Oper di gurgur di annexi di by Dania di moong dal di of the Pakistan government, his usual gibberish. Later on, of the Pakistan government was replaced by of the Toba Tek Singh government. Now he began asking people where Toba Tek Singh was, for that was his hometown. But no one could answer that question for him. And if someone did make an attempt to figure out the present status of Toba Tek Singh, more confusion would follow. It had been rumored that Sialkot, which was once in Hindustan, was now in Pakistan. Who could say where Lahore, which was in Pakistan today, would be tomorrow, and was there anyone who could guarantee that both Pakistan and Hindustan would not disappear some day? In this part of the story, we could see that two Anglo-Indians were there in the asylum and they were admitted in the European ward. When they came to know that the English had left after giving freedom to India, they were really upset. And they had a number of secret meetings in which they discussed about their future status in the asylum. They were thinking about whether their ward, that is the European ward, will be retained. Would they get their breakfast, or would they be forced to eat the Indian chapatis instead of bread? Later on, we could see that a Sikh who was there in the asylum for 15 years, and he usually kept saying some meaningless sentences to himself. He did not sleep either in the day or in the night, and the guard said that he never slept at all. He did not even lie down. He always leaned against the wall, and hence his legs were all swollen. And that was because he was standing too much. But he refused to rest. He didn't like to rest at all. He seriously listened to the talk about partition, and then he would repeat his meaningless sentence which ended with the Pakistan government. Later this phrase was replaced by the Toba Tek Singh government, and he began asking people where Toba Tek Singh was, because that was his hometown. But no one was able to answer him, and if someone tried, there would be more confusion. And Sialkot, which was once in Hindustan, is now in Pakistan. And today Lahore is in Pakistan, but nobody knows what will happen tomorrow. Sometimes Pakistan and India would disappear tomorrow and or someday. So nobody was really knowing what was happening over there. As I mentioned before, this Sikh person usually told a gibberish sentence, and that was Opadi Gurgur. And the meaning of that sentence is the lack of contemplation and lentils of the annex of the above raw sugar of the lantern. This was the translation of that sentence, which was utter nonsense, and it was a refrain used by Toba Tek Singh himself. Moving on, this man's cash had become thin and straggling, and since he seldom bathed, his cash and his beard had become glued together, giving him a ghoulish appearance. But he was a harmless man. In 15 years he had not once been involved in a brawl with the other inmates. Brawl means quarrel, and ghoulish means unpleasant. The guards only knew that he was from Toba Tek Singh, where he owned land. He had been a well-to-do landowner. Then, without warning, he had gone insane. His relatives had bound him with iron chains, brought him to the asylum, and admitted him. They visited him once every month, inquired about his well-being, and then left. Their visits continued until the disturbances began. His name was Bishan Singh, but people now called him Toba Tek Singh. Though it was apparent that he was impervious to the passage of time, he waited for the visits from his relatives and was ready for them when they came. Before their arrival he would tell the guard his visit was coming. He bathed, scrubbed his body with soap, oiled his hair and combed it, put on his best clothes, which he had reserved for this occasion, and then went to see his visitors. He remained silent when they addressed him. Sometimes, however, he muttered, Oper di Gurgur di Annex di Bai Dania di Moong Dal di of Laltain. He had a daughter who was grown up now. As a child she cried whenever she saw her father, and she continued to cry for him when she was a young woman. When the disturbances began, Bishan Singh started asking the people at the asylum where Toba Tek Singh was, and since he was unable to receive a satisfactory answer, his curiosity increased. His visits had also stopped. In this part, we get to know about another inmate of the asylum. This man's hair had become thin, and the reason for that was he seldom bathed, and his hair and beard glued together, and that gave him a very terrifying look. And he was very harmless, and in 15 years he never fought with anybody in the asylum. The guards knew that he was from Toba Tek Singh, and that was his homeland, and he had been a well-to-do landowner over there. But suddenly he became mad, and what his relatives did was to tie him and bring him to the asylum. And they usually visited him once a month, and their visits continued until the disturbances began. His name was Bishan Singh, and the people now call him Toba Tek Singh. The passage of time did not mean anything to him, and he usually waited for his visitors who were his relatives. Before their arrival, he would tell the guards that he is having visitors today, or a visit is coming. For seeing his visitors, he usually bathed, scrubbed his body with soap, oiled his hair and combed it, put on his best clothes which he had reserved for this particular occasion, and when the visitor spoke to him, he remained silent. At times he used to mutter the meaningless sentence that he mutters always. Now we get to know a little bit more about Bishan Singh. He had a daughter who was a grown up right now. She always cried when she saw her father. And when the disturbances began, that is, Bishan Singh started asking where Toba Tek Singh was. Unfortunately, he never got a satisfactory answer. His visits also stopped. In the past, he knew by some impulse when the visit would come, but even that inner voice now stopped for him. So that's all for today. I hope today's session was fruitful for you all. We'll meet in the next class. Thank you so much.